Hello everyone, so thank you for joining me. This is part 3 of working with your ancestors. So today we're going to talk about what the different types of ancestral healing are, how you can work with your ancestors, and also how are ancestors different from other types of guides. So if you already work with guides and you already work with angels or other types of spirits in your business, then how does integrating and bringing in ancestors, how is that different from the energies that you may already be working with? So I want to start with that question first, and then we're going to move on to talking about the different types of ancestral healing. So when you work with guides, one of the main differences with working with ancestors is that ancestors are human or were human, and so have that human experience, versus if you have or if you're working with some guides, or if you're working with particularly like angels or some spirits that have not necessarily been incarnated, and so they may not necessarily know all the struggles that are relevant and that are going to show up when we go through a particular struggle, or when we go through wanting to create a particular goal in our lives. So even though some of the ancestors may not necessarily have, they've been maybe gone for generations, but they still have that human experience. So they still know about connecting with people. They still know about dealing with people. They still know about having to show up and all the complexities that comes with. So if you haven't started working with your ancestors and you're working with other guides in your business, then consider how bringing in ancestors, or bringing in, and not just your particular ancestors, but there may be others who are willing to help you. And so other types of ancestors that are not necessarily only blood relations, are ancestors, let's say, of a particular practice or a particular energetic lineage. And then there's, of course, the ancestral energies of the area where you live. And so those can help you as well. So you don't necessarily need to know that, let's say, your great-grandfather was someone who had a business. I'm sure that you have so many generations that you have access to, that somewhere in your line there was an ancestor who was participating and doing the types of things that you want to be doing. And so they have wisdom and they have blessings that you can draw forward with their help. And so connecting with them is something that I definitely recommend. So if you're not doing that already, then go ahead and start. And if you're welcome to join my Soul Actualized Life community. I'm going to be just having general conversations about the different things that we can start doing, especially in the very first things that you want to do is to create space for your ancestors in your life. And one of the ways to do that is by creating an altar. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to be talking about in the community. So you're welcome to join, and I'm going to post the link in the comments. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is, okay, so let's say you're working with your ancestors, and you may have found that there are some ancestors that don't necessarily have resolved energies. So what are the different types of healing that we can do related to the ancestors? And so depending on the different traditions that you have been working with, or that you've been familiar with, that you will see that the ancestral work looks different. And so one of the things that we need to consider when we start talking about ancestral work is that that work reflects the tradition that that particular work is coming from. And so and then when we are going to be using it ourselves, we need to be careful about re-examining how our situation and our culture is different from the culture from which we may be drawing those practices. And so that is really important. So now I'm not going to go into the whole discussion of appropriation or anything like that. So we're just talking about if you have taken a particular training, or if you've been working with a particular teacher, one of the things that you do want to consider is those particular teachings. What context do they come from, and how is that context different from my own context? And so you need to make sure that you understand that. Now, for example, so if I am talking about something specific, let's say I am trying to do some ancestral healing, and let's say I'm having a parent or a close relative that is transitioning. And so, and let's say that they have been, you get the sense that they need some sort of reconciliation, or you want them to pass, to have a peaceful transition, and for them to really go on their journey and not necessarily stay stuck here with unresolved energies, then then that's a type of healing that can be done for somebody, for a person, for a family member, for a friend who is currently transitioning. So you can think about in those terms. Now, you can also do ancestral healing when something is coming up. So let's say you have a particular pattern, and then something is coming up. You can go ahead and clear the ancestral energies that are currently affecting you. Now, one of the things that happens, though, is that when those energies are cleared, then there may be another energy that comes up to be cleared. And so a lot of times when we have been doing ancestral work, we find that doing one healing isn't enough, because there are other ancestors that are also having unresolved energies that need to come forward to be healed. And so it's really important to look at making sure that your practitioner, whoever it is that you're working with, is really diagnosing what is happening with your particular situation, so that the work that is done is actually the in-depth work that gets to whatever the root of the problem is. Because if you're just working with whatever symptoms are currently showing up, then you may not necessarily be getting to the root. And so you're going to have to keep doing different ancestral healings. And so that's something to keep in mind as you are deciding to do this type of work. And especially if you have seen that that there's patterns that keep recurring, like they keep coming back, and you've worked with them and they continue coming back. And then, like I said before, you see them in other family members, or you see them in other areas of your life. So ancestral healing is something that can be very, very powerful. And I'm not saying that that particular method that you are using is not working. It can work, and you can feel relief, and you can feel the opening, and you can feel the energy flow. But if it's not getting to the root of your particular problem, then you may find that pattern keeps recurring. So it's very important that that becomes part of the work itself, versus just looking at what is currently happening to me right now. And so there's different traditions that work with different types of ancestral work. And one of the things that we need to remember as people who are in this particular culture in the United States is that we do not have a clear and ongoing tradition of helping people transition, in making sure that their lives are resolved as they are transitioning, or during that particular process. And so what happens is that we have so many unresolved dead who are all around us. And now if you are connected to a culture where they do have those particular practices of helping the people who are transitioning, who are dying, and helping them resolve their life so that then they can continue on their journey, and so that they don't get stuck here, then that work is going to be a little different. So if you're coming from that tradition. Now, the problem is that so many of us have ancestors where the culture has really lost that tradition. And so even if, for example, I have some indigenous ancestors, and so they may still have had that tradition until not that long ago, but I also have a lot of other ancestors that I know for sure didn't have that tradition of dealing with and helping the dying to die well. So that is really important to consider. So because this is our context. And so we want to think of what do we need in our context for our healing that may not necessarily be present in other traditions, because their context is different, and not necessarily that there's anything wrong with that traditional healing method, but that their context is different. And so therefore they're doing what works for them, because they do these other things that we may not do. And because we don't do them, then what we do requires that it be different. And so that's really important for us to consider. So again, if you are exploring ancestral healing, or if you know definitely like this is resonating, this is something that I really need more information about, then feel free to reach out to me. Like I said at the beginning of this series, I am going to be offering a program to really work with people one-on-one to be clearing the ancestral energies, and then talking about, well, what happens when we do clear the ancestors? What do we need to do then in order to support that particular clearing? Because if an ancestral energy is affecting us, then what that means is that pattern is showing up in our lives, and we are doing something. We are taking action here in 3D to make that happen. And so we need to become aware of what those patterns are, what the underlying issues, what the root is, and then we need to start making different choices. And when we make these different choices, then that's when now making those different choices is going to be a lot easier when you don't have those unresolved energies around. And so being able to make those different choices now is going to be easier because you don't have those unresolved energies, and you're going to be able to see, not just feel the relief, but you're going to be able to see that transformation in your life. So tune in for the next part of the series, where I will continue talking about ancestral healing and how we can use it. What are some of the ways that we can see benefit from this particular type of healing? So I hope to see you then.